Star Wars. We all know and love it. A goofy story about religious space knights. The prequel trilogy sets the stage for one of the most iconic dystopias in fiction, and it even manages to do it justice. Today, we will be talking about the politics of the Star Wars prequels, and how it makes the original trilogy so much better, even though they aren't the most objectively good films.
Hey guys. So, with the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith just happening recently, we have since watched the prequel trilogy, and the politics of it were pretty fun and interesting, so we kind of felt like it would be fun to talk about that in a video. So we kind of broke down the politics of the Star Wars prequel trilogy into a couple different sections, and the one I was wanting to start with was the dangers of unchecked power.
Oh, that's a good one. So I think we should talk about how we get to this unchecked power first. So they start out with a democratic republic, right? Like there's elected officials, they vote on things, and they decide as a collective.
Yes, that every planet has their own representative that is a part of the Galactic Senate, and together they decide what happens and what doesn't.
Yeah, and that seems like it would be the only good way of doing things, with keeping democracy while also allowing each planet to have a say.
Yeah, like a representative democracy is the only way that you could do that. Like, if we think that a true democracy is infeasible for the United States, then could you imagine how infeasible it would be across an entire, galaxy?
No, exactly.
So obviously, I think a good place to start with the fact that there is representation for every planet is that leads to there being a lot of differing opinions.
Yeah, and that can obviously lead to a lot of disagreement and a lot of holdups whenever it comes to voting on things.
Obviously, with this wide of a scope for a Senate, that things are going to go slow, and during a time of war, they were obviously wanting to make things go faster.
And that makes sense. Wanting to speed things up during wartime, that's why there's martial law, that's why there's executive orders, that's why there's a lot of things like that. But getting rid of democracy, it can only lead down a dark road. Now, Palpatine has been working behind the scenes throughout the 3 movies and before that.
Yes, no doubt. And this has been a thing that has been happening for almost generations, because Darth Plagueis, his master, was a known politician as well. The Sith intentionally chose to go about ruling the galaxy in a political means rather than just brute force. But anyway, in this time of war, they decided to go with a singular leader that makes choices for them to make things quicker. And just so happens, did they choose the most deceitful, malevolent force they could have.
And I have to say, they should have seen this coming. Not because Palpatine wasn't a good actor, he was totally a great actor and nobody suspected him, but anybody who seeks out that type of power, they're not gonna have your best intentions at heart. It's so obvious that anybody who seeks that type of power probably is gonna do something bad and for the betterment of themselves. Anybody who has the best intentions of the collective would take into account the wants of the collective.
Thusly why they would never take that power. Yeah, you made a point that I kind of wanted to talk about. That people are kind of inherently drawn to charisma, and Palpatine had a ton of that. People loved him. People were so manipulated by his charm and his ability to relate with people that they were so willing to look past the red flags and never suspected a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I feel like this is a thing that we can see in real life. It's just another thing that you just can't really trust charisma and what people say at face value, because you don't know what they actually believe and what they're actually shooting for. I thought it was also interesting how he had a galaxy-wide grip on it before he, got his unlimited power, where the Senate did actually elect him to basically have all power and to be able to create the Empire. He had so many plans going into this that probably should have been able to be foreseen, right?
Well, the thing is, the Jedi Order, they were too confident in themselves. They believed that they had a grip on the galaxy that could not be hindered. And I feel like that can be seen today, where people believe that we can't slip back into a time where things were worse because of all the progress we made, when in reality it just takes a few steps back and we're right back where we were decades ago. They have to know that it's about active participation on their part that allows it to continue that way, and not their pacifism of just sitting there and allowing it to continue how it is. Because it's a fight. It really is.
Yeah, and this is what I think is a good segue into our next point.
Okay.
Because in it, I talk about the rule of two. The point is the ability to overstep power boundaries in times of turmoil. The Jedi really did have a strong grip over the Sith. So much so that they never felt like they would ever come back. They thought that the Sith was an extinct religion that was never going to come back. And I feel like the absolute power that the Jedi Order had, it far surpassed the two Sith that there is. That led the Sith, Darth Sidious and however many Sith prior to that, to go about ruling the galaxy politically. So they obviously knew that they had to lay the groundwork for creating a war, an environment for them to be able to get more power politically. The Galactic Senate was probably the only entity that had more power than the Jedi.
Yeah, and that's actually really interesting that you say that, because that's similar to how some extremists will say things to swing moderates in their direction in order to get more power on their side.
Yeah, like with Palpatine's promises to the Trade Federation that if they just did this blockade on Naboo and if they just invaded them, that they would be wealthy and they would be happy.
And at peace. That's genuinely what they wanted. They just wanted peace.
They clearly were reluctant to the entire time. They were just orchestrated to by Palpatine.
And he does that on both sides in order to orchestrate this war. At face value, he's on the good guy side, the one that's not oppressing the other one. And then he is secretly being Lord Sidious to the Trade Federation.
He did play both sides of it. He was actively arming both sides for a war. And it is believed that Sifo-Dyas, the Jedi Master, did actually place the order, but it was apparently put into his mind by Count Dooku. And it was also funded by Count Dooku.
And you can see how Palpatine is sowing discord, even in the first episode.
Destabilization of the government is the foundation of his rule.
And that can so be seen in history. Palpatine created this conflict to destabilize the government in order to usurp the power for himself and to instill his trusted followers as important political figures, such as Anakin. Because Anakin is such a loyal follower to Palpatine as an individual, this does lead to the rise of fascism in this universe. And that is seen through Anakin putting his allegiance to an individual over his country or Senate or honestly his loved ones, including Obi-Wan.
Yeah, and that was the last point that I really wanted to cover, is that the rise of fascism in the Star Wars universe. That this so perfectly demonstrates the dangers of electing a leader who promises stability and order at the expense of freedom and democracy. And we kind of covered this a little bit earlier with how wide the Galactic Senate spreads, that there is going to be inherent disagreement in that large of a group of people with such varied backgrounds that it's going to be hard to come to decisions, right? It really does feel like the only way that we're ever going to get things to happen is by electing a single individual to make decisions for the collective. But I would argue that no individual is capable of that.
I completely agree. And I feel like Americans can really take a lot from this, because America is truthfully a patchwork of cultures, and so different areas are going to have different say-sos. So it's going to take forever to reach an agreement, But once we do reach an agreement, we can know that it's in the best interest of all of these groups of people.
I mean, that's what sells democracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars is this hyperbolic, silly sci-fi universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it really does show how slippery that slope is. That the erosion of democratic institutions and how quickly that happens really can reflect real-world occurrences of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like George Lucas did a very good job at this. And I can't believe that I'm saying this about a prequel series that has Jar Jar Binks.
The prequels have such a warm place in my heart due to the nostalgia of it, but honestly, they're such objectively poor films. And I feel like Jar Jar Binks is just like encapsulates that perfectly. But in between the lines of Jar Jar Binks, George Lucas really did write an incredible story behind all of this to set up the universe of his original trilogy and expand upon it and make it really a believable transition of how this crazy dystopia ended up in this situation.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, how do you get to this point of such severe oppression in this fantastical world of Jedi Knights?
The story and the politics of it and the creation of the Empire is what makes these movies so rewatchable for me. And there's been times we've skipped the Jar Jar Binks parts just because, gosh, they're so, like, brain rotting.
And the pod racing scenes. Oh, that first episode is a tough watch.
He makes such poor decisions, but, like, I feel like it has a lot of what a lot of movies these days are lacking. And that's a real story from the start that he wanted to tell.
Yeah, and there wasn't a ton of fan service in it. Whenever you think of prequel trilogy, you think like, oh, it's just gonna have all the same characters but younger.
Yeah.
No, he made an entirely new world that you wouldn't even think of from the original trilogy, because it's completely erased by that time. The political storytelling in this trilogy is superb. It really is.
And if you take anything from this, is that you just need to continue to fight for democracy no matter what.
Always fight for democracy. Always fight for your neighbor to be able to say something.
But that's everything we have for today. So if you guys liked it, hit us with a like. If you guys want more stuff like this, please put down in like the comments. This is kind of a new type of format. All of the stuff we've done before is booked. If you like the movie content, we could totally do some more. If you just like us, please hit us with a subscribe. We would really appreciate it.
I think that's it for today.
Cool. See you guys.
See ya.